Thanks everybody for coming out. It's great to see so many people here. So my name is Cy Scott. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Headset. So we're a cannabis market intelligence company. We've been in the space for just over 4 years at this point. So really excited to be here to kind of talk about analytics and how you can actually put them to use, and really just a nice conversation here with Brian.
So, and my name is Brian Quigley. I'm a co-founder of Green Sky Strategy with Jim McAlpine and Ophelia Chong, my mentors in the cannabis space. I've got a couple other members from the team here, Pete Dai-Talevi and Chris Susong. My background, I actually have been kind of investing and trying to learn the space for the last 5 years, but spent the last 16 years at a small tobacco company called Altria. I ran 2 of their business units there for the last 7 years. And we formed Green Sky because collectively we have a passion around really combining the kind of deep cannabis insight with strategic thinking and perspective and capabilities from outside of cannabis to really drive businesses and brands forward. And so, we've been working with Cy's team at Headset to really focus on how can we build analytic capability in this industry to make better decisions to really drive your business and move it forward. So we're really happy to be here.
Yeah, and we thought we would have just a nice conversation here about analytics, ask each other a few questions, but also we thought, during our conversation, given the size of the room, it'd be great to take any questions as we just touch on certain topics. So feel free to just kind of raise your hand. It looks like there's some mics, but it might just be easy to just kind of shout out a question or ask us to elaborate maybe on a point. That way we can kind of keep it a bit interactive if there's interest. Otherwise, happy to make time at the end for Q&A. So should we maybe ask the room?
Let's throw it out to the room. Yeah.
All right. So how many in this room have a history or are currently leveraging analytics in some fashion today? All right, you guys are we're good here.
Good, so. Awesome. So just to get a sense of like where you are in the industry, just show of hands, who is like a manufacturer using analytics from like a branded manufacturer perspective? Okay, so a little bit, retail? So what other operations, businesses do we have represented in the room? Service providers, what else? Great, okay, what else? Brands, brand building, awesome. Perfect. Great. So we got like a good, diverse cross-section of the industry. Awesome.
Yeah, great. So, I guess to kind of start, Headset and kind of the thought around Headsets and where we came from or where I'm coming from, is kind of a longer view in the cannabis space. I've been involved since about 2010. Prior to Headset, I started a company, Leafly, which is a consumer internet product really around strains. And back then it was... the industry was growing at a steady clip, but relatively immature, like on a variety of levels. And one of them was around the data side of the business. And we started getting a lot of questions from like brands, product manufacturers, retailers that wanted to know, market data essentially. And we thought also at the same time, cannabis is going to continue to mature. We'll see, more and more of a need for that, and that really was the impetus to start Headset. And we look at analytics from a retailer-derived metric. So we work with retailers, dispensaries, and we see transactional information and kind of try and make sense of it from a business intelligence perspective, which is kind of your own operational data, but also from a market data perspective. So that's kind of my background, where we're coming from,
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I'd like to get your thoughts on, because with what, the power that data gives you, and this morning, who saw the conference this morning on the investment landscape and the tone? There's a lot of sobering commentary there about, what's going on from a capital standpoint. You hear people talking about extinction events potentially happening, overcrowded marketplaces. So I'd love to get your perspective on, at this juncture in the industry, why do you think data and analytics is so important and how it can really help, people in industry really kind of navigate through that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, in that context, I think a lot of the interest around analytics is we're at this stage now where obviously it's getting very competitive. The competitive landscape continues to to expand. More and more brands are coming to market. It's harder and harder to get retail shelf space. Getting consumers to come to your location versus others. So really just staying ahead of that and using analytics to kind of measure that. If you're producing a product, looking at competitive products and competitive price points and volume and the type of products that they're developing, I think is a big driver. I also think just really maximizing opportunity. We're kind of in this phase, depending on the market, right? Every market's a little bit different. California is very different than Washington and different than Canada and so on. But depending on the market, I would say that a lot of them are at this point now where things are relatively established. Supply chain is solid or much better than what it was, and it's really like how do you maximize on that opportunity, and really leveraging analytics can help you there. And then last, I would say I think just the maturation of the industry, like it's just becoming more mature. You're getting people with diverse backgrounds, like Altria, coming into the space that I'm sure, not knowing the inner workings of Altria, but I'm sure that, analytics were a big part of that business. And so as individuals like yourself and many in this room come to the cannabis industry, it's really driving some of that adoption.
No, it's a great point. I mean, it's funny, a lot of the conversations you're happening, and one of the phrases we've kind of coined at Green Sky is, the ability to just operate with a field of dreams strategy, right? Which is build it and they will come. Those days are behind us. So, now, what's really interesting, I think, and exciting is you're seeing the combination of deep knowledge in this industry and the history of the industry to what got it to where it is, but now tapping into these capabilities and to see, outside looking in, what's been amazing is you think about, so many people in the room are able to learn from non-cannabis industries and saying, wow, if we're creating a business and data is so important and data is so central to how businesses operate, how can we actually create solutions to give better insight into the consumer, into the marketplace and where it's going? And that's all of a sudden what allows you to not just build it and have them come, but really have foresight into where the consumer's going, how to position your business, how to, not play where the puck is, but play where the puck is going, and have a little bit more predictive nature. And that I think is what will give people the opportunity to actually live through what might be a challenging time, but be able to do so really opportunistically and not only survive, but thrive. So.
Right, absolutely. So when we were starting Headset, we looked at traditional industries and kind of looked at service providers in those industries, and looked at companies like Nielsen or IRI or NPD that provide market data for the consumer packaged goods world, or FMCG, fast moving consumer goods world, and kind of looked at their solutions, just given that those industries like CPG have leveraged market data and analytics for a long time. Coming from your background, is there like a model, or are there certain things that at Altria or other CPG type companies you were at that you leveraged?
It's really interesting. I mean, first and foremost, if you think about, and I think this industry is aligned to actually make a lot of the things that work in other industries apply here. But first and foremost, think about it from a consumer and brand standpoint. There shouldn't be this view of a massive conspiracy theory about competitors and who's coming after me. Everybody in the industry has access to what's going on with market size, what are the trends, what consumers are buying, what products, and there's a sharing of knowledge. I know it's natural to have this view of, hey, because data is really important, but there's really also power in sharing that data for a macro industry perspective. And then, once you have those tools available to you, then it's really about, and you don't have to be, I think people make up that you need to create the Altria system, right? If you have a business that's been around for 50 years where you have tons of heuristics, pricing sensitivity, cross-category elasticities, things that unless you're like an advanced math major, will blow your mind. But I was an English major. Okay, so I'm proof that you don't have to be a math major to really be interested in data. You just need to be curious. So actually, I think it's okay to start wherever you are in your journey and say, how can I just be more informed with the data to make a decision, right? So it shouldn't be just, it's okay to have a gut reaction, but you don't have to build this, spend, tons of money hiring statisticians. It's just about being curious and trying to find answers to questions. So, you know, a lot of people make up, you've got to invest tons of money. And actually, I think you can just move that ball and really importantly, build your capability as you go. And that actually is really simple. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it really does start with the question. You know, kind of, you know, you can look at a dashboard all day long, but if you don't have a specific question that you're trying to answer, it can just be a lot of charts and graphs and a bunch of numbers. So really, kind of, you know, honing in what is it that item that you need to be thinking about, and then from there you can kind of think about the types of data that might be able to drive that decision. I think, you know, we're very kind of laser focused in the market intelligence piece on product sales, but I think when you think of analytics in a broader perspective, for a lot of businesses it touches on all sorts of things, not just product development, competitive positioning, but even just analytics around, you know, your consumer interest, and if you have a web presence, you know, looking at your analytics on your website, like where's the traffic coming from, and what kind of audiences coming to your website, and you know, is the content resonating with them, and starting to kind of ask those types of questions and think about where can you get that data is critical.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, who here knows what kind of the difference in qualitative and quantitative data? Does that, you guys, make sense, right? So if you don't, basically qualitative data, think about that as if you were talking to 20 customers about what they're buying and why they're buying it, to kind of get that deep insight understanding, that's really valuable. But that can also be predicted from a large scale, right? So it gives you deep insight. So if you complement that qualitative, which is important, with quantitative, like what is actually happening across a set of 4 states, or what is actually happening in an entire region where trends are occurring, and you need to balance those two things. And I think the qualitative is really important, and there's a lot of that deep understanding and insight, but complementing that with quantitative data is a big opportunity to get the balance. And I'm curious, in your from your perspective, what gets in the way of you know, when we talk about analytics or talk about data, like what are some of the things that get in the way of actually pursuing that? Like, is it, you know, I think it could be scary, right? There's preconceived notions. Like, I'd love to hear, what do you hear?
Yeah, certainly. I think, you know, analytics, it sounds like you need to be an analyst to really understand it. And certainly, if you are an analyst, or if you have that background as an analyst, there are some advantages. But it can be, you know, at any layer or level that you want. So if you're a little more, you know, high level or abstracted, just kind of looking at top line metrics, you know, those primary KPIs for your business, you know, that handful of items that you're really measuring, you know, that's, you know, potentially not that hard to digest. But it just really varies on kind of your role and like what you need to know. I don't think, you know, every organization needs a big data company or data arm, like you were mentioning with the Altria method of just like, you got to have this big investment. But it definitely just starts by looking at numbers. You know, with Headset, given we're a data company, you know, we have core values as a company, and one of our core values is being data driven. It's kind of like, you know, if we're going to talk the talk, we got to walk the walk, and I think that's a good value for any business, right? So when you're getting into these discussions about direction or competitive pressure or what have you, you can actually point to some numbers, and I don't think you have to be an analyst to do that. I think you just need to kind of start to figure out where to be looking, and again, those questions that you want to get answered.
It's about that curiosity, that mindset, and using data as just ways to answer questions. I think if we kind of talk that way, it opens our minds up and allows us to be, you know, think a little bit more differently versus being afraid. Yeah, question right here.
So to your point, looking at the industry and advocating, a little bit of pushback, that is, a lot of experience in the healthcare industry with respect to data. Technology is inoperable across systems, so the data was accurate across them. I think this industry is, on scale of magnitude, much worse. 33 different states
Yeah.
on their own individually
It's actually a really interesting, great point, because there's lots of areas I think in this industry. If I think back to, one of the narratives of being in the tobacco business was having to run an operating company that was not regulated by FDA, and then to be regulated by FDA. And when you start to think about think about that narrative in this industry, you know, product regulation from the FDA is really about data and understanding of your products and science. It's a different aspect of the conversation that really I think this industry is way behind in. And frankly, when we talk a lot about, legalization and when will legalization happen, and I'm not going to predict the when and what that looks like. But one thing I do believe very strongly in is when you think about the regulatory frameworks that are going to be in place, there's going to be significant need for new focus on data around usage, around initiation, around product-specific data and consumer data that's going to be really critical in the regulated environment that is we're not thinking about yet. So actually, I do agree with you. I think kind of part of my point before is really more on the maybe market consumer operation side, which is, I think if wherever you are in your industry, I think it's always important to ask yourself, wherever you are in your use of data and being a data-driven culture, we should always be pushing that, right? But it's okay to take that in steps, because if you don't build the capability in your organization to be data-driven, it will never get done, right? There's been lots of examples. People don't realize that sometimes to make that happen, you need to have a change management, thought process, because if you've been running your business a certain way and all of a sudden you're asking different questions of yourself and of your team, it's actually more about change management. So there's a lot of things that have to happen. But I do agree from a broader perspective, there are huge opportunities where this industry needs to really move that are going to be critical for your company to continue to be successful when we're in a more regulated environment. So.
Yeah, and I think as far as an industry adoption of data, one nice thing about the cannabis space is that it's being developed in today's world, and it's very top of mind. Like the electronic medical records, I think analogy, it's 50 years ago or even further back, that was a hard thing to do, right? If even possible at all. But now, technology does enable that, and I think some states, many of the states and in Canada with Statistics Canada trying to do measurement. I think that there's definitely an attempt. Obviously it's not totally perfect quite yet. I think certain things like the traceability programs, kind of slow rollout, have been challenging. And we look at the tax revenue numbers to benchmark like our sample size in a market, and we notice states doing restatements, which just goes to show that they're comfortable with the data that they put out, and then they have to go back and restate it. So I think everyone's trying to iron that out, but the good news is it's already kind of in the DNA of the industry in a lot of ways, like the way the states are thinking about traceability, the way they're reporting on top line numbers. Like for example, Massachusetts is great. It's got this whole website built on a service provider called Socrata, where you can go and explore the data and explore the sales data at a higher level, not down necessarily to the SKU, to the product level, but you can see some interesting stuff, and they present that back to the public. So, that's different than I think a lot of other verticals, and I think it's just kind of that transparency that the cannabis industry is trying to have as it's developing to build that trust with the general consumer.
And the flip is, if I think about an area where cannabis is more developed and advanced, the view of the supply chain here, you've got much greater visibility and possibility like in retail, and manufacturers care about this, as do distributors, to see volume going into an outlet and volume going out of the outlet to really understand inventory management, replenishment. I mean, those are things that in a broader if you're not a DSD organization, which direct store delivery, if you're an Altria and you're selling to 250,000 stores, you don't have that visibility. So out of stocks, product freshness, those are things that the connectivity and the data is there to really move this industry forward. So there's a hand go up over here. Your question? Yeah, I mean, well, if you think about it there's a balance, right? And one of the things that a lot of people are very worried about is, well, one, you've got PII concerns with if you have your customers' data, that's a real concern, right? I mean, that is like the number one reason you don't get valid emails is because people, they're afraid to let all that information out there. But given the way the dispensary operates, yeah, like that is very important data to you as a retailer, because your ability to understand at an individual level market basket, transaction level data, pricing sensitivity at an individual level is huge. And to have visibility into that and know how to connect it into your marketing approaches, into your promotional strategy is huge. Now, I do think that sometimes, back to the point of, visibility, I think there's a middle ground where there can be sharing of data where people are protected for the greater good of understanding the marketplace without giving up the secret sauce. And that, so if everybody's like, is so afraid to share the data, it will be this dog-eat-dog competitive environment. And frankly, like if you think about competition, what most people get wrong, most people think competition is about putting your competitor out of business. That's actually the wrong way to think about it, because when that happens, what happens is that's how people drop prices. They're promoting more. You're taking money out of the total value chain. Competition is about like how do multiple entities actually thrive and grow, and with differentiated positions. It's not about putting your competitor out of business. It's about actually having a differentiated position that gives you a unique way to make money. So, I think if people can find that sweet spot of sharing data for the good of the organization with still having protections is a nice opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you're right about this idea of a trade-off. Like you mentioned, working with other service providers, you might not have a direct relationship with the customer. I think if you look at like direct-to-consumer brands, I think there's a lot of value in having that relationship with the consumer. A lot of interest in owning that relationship for things like retention and just kind of understanding who's purchasing your product and why they're purchasing the product. So if you could get access to that, I think it would be pretty good. You see the model like the Amazon stores or what people sell through Amazon might not have that relationship with customers, and people talking about moving away from that a bit because it's more lucrative when you know who your customer is, certainly. But the trade-off is you might get access to a big market quickly, right? And you don't have to spend the kind of money that you might have to build up a whole delivery system by working with a partner such as Ease.
Okay, well, let's go over here first. First of all, I want to give you guys like a shout out for like raising your hands and asking questions, because this is, we will all get more out of it. So thank you.
As a new brand coming to the market, when you look at data collection, is it really the tax data that's going to be relied upon, or are there movers in the space that are sensory-based collection of farm data in the supply chain? And then when you get to the marketplaces that are emerging, that data collection, point of sale or marketplace or delivery, we're faced with all of that. Is there providers that are emerging with quantitative data in that space that are gathering more organic data?
Yeah, from our end, we definitely get the marketplace data, so what's happening at retail via the point of sale, and certainly have good coverage there and kind of understand the dynamics of other brands, other competitive brands, where opportunities may exist in the space if you're looking at maybe producing a new segment or new category that you don't already, you can evaluate that. As far as on the grow side, right. As far as building it into your infrastructure and just being data driven as an organization.
And make partnerships, and you want to carry an SOP that where's that data source that analyzes, right? Maybe they're collecting it, but where's that? Create our own, I guess.
Right. For that level, I mean, you might have to. With those suppliers or whoever you might be sourcing from. Tax revenue data from the state, I mean, it's good for top line numbers and maybe some high level projections, and just kind of you can trend out on how big of an opportunity might exist, but it'll only get you so far, but at least it's something.
So hand up over here.
Wondering if you had any insight post the crisis into where consumers are going. Medical, tax wrap, where are they going?
Yeah, definitely. So
I'll give you the shameless plug, because didn't you guys just like release a nice little update on what's going on with
yeah,
vape?
yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, don't want to sit up here talking about headset the whole time, but
I did it for you.
yeah, thanks. But certainly, we see an impact. One of the things that we do a bit differently is we're connected to the point of sale at the retail level, so we see it as we're having this conversation. Things are transacting, it's getting processed. So we did see the vapor pen impact pretty quickly, and it's pretty significant. And it depends on market. And we recently published a small industry report on that, so I encourage you to check it out and see. Yeah, it really depends. Like in like California, since we're in California, the vapor pen category was about 30% of sales, which is pretty significant compared to other markets. But it's just the nature of the California market. So now I think it lost 5-6 percentage points. So it's pretty significant, especially kind of the volume that California does. As far as other categories, I think there is a bit of a lift in things like edibles, but we also saw some trends on like store sales just going down too. So I think some people might have gotten scared and not shopped. But the good news is the drop has essentially stopped at this point. It's kind of leveled out, but we're still below, so we're not seeing it climb back. But I'm sure it will happen once more information is out there and the public gets some details on what's causing the problem.
And it's actually a great little microcosm example of, if you're kind of have a data-driven business approach, how you can react to that. So, one of the things that we do is we work with, dispensary operators to really help them as they're deploying, tools in their outlets, like really help build that capability, help, think about how does this data drive your pricing assortment strategy. And so for some of the people that we work with, I guess this is my shameless plug, right? When the news started breaking, we started flagging, hey, let's start monitoring your inventory in carts and in batteries. Let's understand what's happening, and let's just be like hyper vigilant right now to see what's going on, so we're not oversupplied, or if this ends up being a short-term thing, that you're not tying up cash flow in a category. And oh, by the way, where are those people going to be going? So let's have your associates start asking people, if they're not buying that cart anymore, well, what are they buying? If they're going back to flour, all right, we got to understand that, and let's think about what does that mean from an inventory cash flow perspective. So, when you have that perspective, when you hear that news, you go, okay, what does this mean for me? Because I don't want to be missing out on sales opportunities. I want to keep my customers happy. So that's a way where if you've got just your question that goes up in your head as well, I wonder what this is going to do to my inventory, my volume and sales and my margin. Hey, I got to start thinking about this. Let's dig into it.
Yeah, and as a product manufacturer as well, we did see certain brands weren't as impacted as others, and there's a variety of factors that could go into that, and that's some of the qualitative side of the data business. But things like consumer education, getting in front of it, talking about how you're testing, talking about what you're testing for, assuring consumers, and maybe if your brand is doing that, you're going to have a better position at the retail, all things being equal. Other things, there's a lot of noise right now in certain markets around the flavored, terpene additive vape cartridges. So if your brand has a lot of those versus others, but we did see some that weren't as impacted as others.
That's another hand, yeah.
Fight the last war, and so you come into your data request from biases of what you did before. What have you found to be unique to this industry, or the aha moments? Or should have been looking at this data that I wasn't before?
That's a good one.
That's a great question.
I think one unique thing about this industry, and kind of if I had a time machine, I could go back 4 years. The number of SKUs or SKUs, the products that are out there is just massive for the amount of markets that we track, which is the adult use markets. And a lot of that has to do with the different strains. A lot of it has to do with prepackaged flour, so it comes in single gram, 2 gram, 3.5 gram, and so on, and then those getting cycled out. And so that just trying to create measurement around that so you don't see so much volatility, because it can get pretty granular and pretty noisy when you have that many products. So like, what are the ways you can look at the market maybe in a different level of aggregation or a different type of aggregation to kind of better understand the trends, because strain to strain, different package sizes and all that can get quite noisy and kind of hard to distill. So I think that's something that we still are working through as an organization and figuring out. And this as an industry, as we look at that type of data, but that might be something that in hindsight, I guess, do a little differently.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add, this is maybe a personal thing, which is, you can be, in a world of consumer. This is a really robust consumer packaged goods product category, right? And from my experience, I worked before tobacco. I spent a lot of time in food. I worked in advertising. I worked on Pampers, a lot of different categories. And one of the things that big branded companies can get wrong is they view the consumer through the lens of their business, right? So they define the consumer landscape through, I've got this brand, I've got Pampers, and that's going to kind of shade the lens of what they do and don't do and how they go to market. Versus the holistic approach is you should view your business and your brand through the lens of the consumer. And when you flip that, it uncovers different possibilities. And that, just from a mantra, I think that is where this industry really needs to, we have opportunity to really make that pivot, right? That's part of the pivot away from, well, I want to be the 400th brand in California, okay? That might feel good to you, but that might not make you be successful, because what's the consumer reason? Like, what makes you different? What are you giving to the consumer and that's a unique proposition? And those are knowable things, right? Those are knowable things. So that's, for me, is a big one.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think when you look at a market over time, California looks very different year one than a market like Colorado or like Washington, just because of the evolution of the space and the different segments that have come in, and this trend towards things like microdosing, that just didn't really exist 4 years ago, and so it's kind of staying in front of that and kind of keep innovating and tracking that. But a lot of it is hard to project, because everyone's so creative, and there's all these great new brands and products that come to market, and consumers are still figuring it out as well. I think the average consumer, anecdotally, I don't think they really understand how to purchase cannabis. I think it's pretty overwhelming for someone that is just coming to the space for the first time or going to a store for the first time. And you have the sales staff, you have the budtenders that are there to help. But I think that consumer preferences haven't been defined, where it's so rigorous. So just kind of watching that change, I think is a unique aspect of the space.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. When you're in a growing category, the opportunities to shape that category are significant. And so I think another opportunity is not just understanding who is in the category today, but really understanding who are the consumers that are really highly interested in the category, and what's their mindset, what are the product preferences that they might be looking for. I think a lot of us have seen and heard the story of, the first time you've gone back into a dispensary, if you haven't been a cannabis consumer for a long time, it's a bit overwhelming, and it's a little bit of a different world, right? And that's where a lot of the consumers and the growth are going to be happening. So I think, to the point of looking at a trajectory of a geography as it legalizes and as that arc of consumer adoption comes on, so you can kind of get a lot of those insights from going kind of back in time and understanding how did preferences evolve, but then understanding who is really saying, yeah, like I'm really interested in this category and I want to learn more about it and I want to understand those motivations. That really can shape the direction of where the whole industry goes. So that's a fun space to play.
Yeah, I mean, this whole industry is a fun space to play. Obviously, I think everyone in the room is a little biased, and I'm a little biased, but love it.
Yeah. Yep.
In the beverage space, with the integration of Nielsen, getting that speed data, is it impacting that space from a KEGAR standpoint, or it's nascent? I get that. So you got an infrastructure that needs to be built, you got consumers coming out wondering if they line up, or do you see? I'm just actually looking for affirmation because I tend to dig into that data.
Yeah.
I think I'm really satisfied with. I believe it's a bigger projection than.
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question or $1 billion question for these big alcohol brands and other. I mean, it goes beyond alcohol, right, into wellness and all sorts of categories, health and beauty, you name it. I don't actually know, hard like science like this is actually the cause. But there are things that, yeah, like alcohol sales are down in markets with legalization, so you can kind of make some correlations. I think, Nielsen has a service they call Home Scan. It's like a panel. Nielsen, for those that aren't familiar, they're well known for like their media tracking, like TV ratings, but they also track product sales in the CPG world. But they have a panel so they can ask their consumers. So I don't think they've asked that question quite yet, but that's I'm sure top of mind because the CPG companies do want to know. They're knocking on our door trying to kind of at least understand what's going on from a sales perspective, from like a risk assessment profile type analysis. So it's definitely top of mind. I don't know if it's reality, but probably people have only so much money to spend. It's like share of wallet or share of purse, as they call it. And if you only have so much, and you're going to spend it on cannabis or alcohol, so it would eat into that market share is the assumption.
Yeah, right up here.
Headset collecting sales for the new on-premise cafe?
Yeah, it would be great. Yeah, I think definitely we'll be working on that. It's really just kind of understanding the scope of it, like how many more of those cafes we'll start to see. But that is consumption, certainly. One of the nice things, well, until this, I mean, this is great for the industry, but for us, there's one channel to purchase cannabis, really, right? In a market, it's adult use cannabis. You can get it at a retailer or delivery, but it's still that channel where something like alcohol, you got to worry about the bars, stadiums at sporting events, restaurants, liquor stores, and it gets very complex and very challenging. So that's just something kind of like as we all evolve as organizations, we're going to have to figure out if it does start having an impact on sales. We're definitely going to need to track that.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about, so anybody in the room, CBD, industrial hemp focused over THC cannabis, right? So in a CBD context, that's exactly right. I mean, you have, multi-channel outlets. You have, there's a lot more variability going on in that space. E-commerce. So you need to have an even broader sense of where the consumer is shopping, and what are those dynamics that you need to deliver if you're a brand, for example, to compete in an e-commerce context versus a drug or wellness, health and beauty context. In that space, and I think that will be an interesting spot where, as we see how industrial hemp and CBD consumer products evolves, could be a really great learning lab to bring back into THC-based product propositions. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're producing a product that might be CBD dominant or have some sort of CBD, like a topical in the cannabis, and selling only in adult use or medical dispensaries, but you're in a market like California, there is a substitution opportunity where a consumer may go to a traditional retailer to buy a topical that's just CBD, or they may go to the adult use cannabis retailer to buy a topical that has some THC in it, but also a lot of CBD. And so, kind of having that holistic view is important when you're thinking about, your brand positioning. So it is getting more complex quickly,
Absolutely.
which is just, kind of in a way to be expected. It's great that it's happening. It just means that this industry is maturing and going the right direction.
Yep. And I think collectively, the more we're driving analytics into the collective conversation that enables us all to kind of further the knowledge, the tools, understanding. So yeah, we have a few more minutes, so a few more questions. I think your hand went up first, so we'll go in order, okay?
Hi. With the requirement to test products, we're seeing that we're getting a lot of information around the cannabinoids and terpenes, and although there's still some time that needs to be given in order for us to feel that there's some confidence in that information, but I'm wondering if you know anybody who's doing anything interesting with that from an analytics standpoint, and then also from an integration standpoint, like integrating that with like a point of sale in order to do some sort
To the first part of the question, I know Leafly, if you've followed it for some time, it was always indica sativa hybrid. That's kind of how we set it up and kind of perpetuated that for better or for worse in a lot of ways, because it is much more nuanced with like the terpene profile. So they recently rebranded and relaunched. So now everything is like terpene defined. And they've tried to make it a little more consumer friendly. Some of the terpene names can be challenging for people to say. And so if you're walking into a dispensary asking for limonene or linalool or whatever, it's hard. So they try and make it a little easier for the consumer. So that's good. I think that's going to change some of the conversation, because I think consumers that have a little sense go, hey, I want a sativa because I want to stay awake, or I want an indica because I want to be sleepy. But for those that have some experience, it might not always be the case. So that might change the conversation, which is going to impact sales and impact the way brands talk about their products. As far as tying that back to sales data, not that I'm familiar with quite yet, but I think once we know how brands are positioning, we could probably start measuring something like that.
And just a little something different to think about, which is from a quality standpoint. You think about GMPs. And to the kind of the data is where the data is now, but even from your own operations perspective, building the capability to understand that data, track it, batch release, then also you're building your own capability to actually wonder, well, something doesn't look right here, right? So I think it's also about how can you use that data to strengthen your own understanding of what's the data you're getting back from your suppliers. If something really doesn't make sense, it's possible that data can be wrong, right? And you need to kind of be able to sniff those experiences out. You've got to be able to be looking at it all the time. So I do think there's, just from an operator standpoint and manufacturer standpoint, it's going to be critical to build that muscle from a quality control perspective. I think we've got like a minute, so I think we're done. Oh, we're done.
Okay,
well,
cut off.
So Cy, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And thanks to the audience
thank
as
you
well.
guys. Yep.
We can be available outside if you want to ask those follow-up questions.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.